Hey everyone, welcome to Cloud Masters. I'm your host, Matan Bordeaux. I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Clark, and we are joined today by three AWS security experts. What the Bee Gees were to disco music, they are to AWS security. So we have just the perfect people to talk about this topic, which is what to do in the event of a security breach. So really essential topic for any AWS account owner. We're joined by Greg, Tyler, and Dima. Uh, like I said, all AWS security experts. We're going to cover, a bunch of topics like identification, containment, remediation, and proactive things you can do to secure your AWS account. So why don't we just kick things off? Maybe Tyler, you can kick this off. What are the most common signs of a security breach in an AWS account? Like, how do I even realize this?
Yeah, thanks, Patan. I would say so when you're looking for signs of a security breach, you're looking for anything that's unexpected, something that might be like outside of known patterns. And a lot of times, the most common ones tend to be billing alerts, unexpected costs, either from services that you use that have suddenly shut up, or maybe services that you don't use, and all of a sudden you see some of that in use. It could also be still low cost, but more resources being created, accounts being used maybe that you haven't seen, or users being used that haven't been active for a while. And then from there, it's just whatever else you have that operationally, right? Like, do you have logging in place? Do you have anything else that you can detect unusual activity? Endpoint protection. Do you see malicious activity? But commonly, it's billing alerts, it's API usage, and then if you have any kind of protection like logging of network traffic, that can be something as well to see.
Once you have that, or once you suspect that something's going on, I imagine AWS has, there's a million services. So I imagine there's at least a service or two that helps that helps kind of help you dig deeper, like maybe CloudTrail
Yes,
or something else.
definitely. Yeah. So if you suspect a security breach, your best friend is going to be your CloudTrail logs. And like Tyler was saying, logging is very important. So it's very, very, very important to get logging in place. If you don't have logging in place, you'll probably be flying blind in an incident like this. So you definitely want to put CloudTrail logs as one of your first logs to enable. That's probably going to be where all your API calls come in. That's where all the detection will come in when you do your queries. The other thing to look at is guard duty. Guard duty is another one that does intrusion detection and looks for anomalies. Look for any alerts in guard duty as well. And that will also guide you into a direction. So it could be like an S3 breach. It could be some EC2 acting up. It could be in the compromised keys that happen. So CloudTrail logs definitely will be your best friend to look at into this.
With the CloudTrail logs that you mentioned, is there anything in place to stop a malicious user from trying to cover their tracks, from trying to delete those?
Yes, definitely. There's policies that you can put in place in order for them not to be able to do that. So you want to put those policies in place when you set up these types of logging material. And so when you do that, there's other services too that you can use, such as like Control Tower within an organization that helps you with those permissions and helps you with keeping that CloudTrail log being able to be accessed only to by certain roles or accounts in that manner. So yes, there's definitely a way to do that.
Having those enabled in the services that you're utilizing will help you to kind of discover and build the analysis fast, right? So let's think about how you can analyze your logs. So first of all, logs, right? Any type of logs that you can enable, please do. Any services, CloudWatch logs, CloudTrail, things like RDS logs, EKS audit logs. So then you can bring in AWS Amazon Athena. So Athena is a service, uh, the service query service that uses just native SQL, and it works against S3. So, like as we said, logs. Then you can store them in S3. Then you can bring in Athena. You can set up a table. You can set up views, and then analyze and run the queries. Like what type of queries would you do? Like, would you do to understand the suspicious activity? So first of all, could be a suspicious API addresses. So you can try to get and understand what is like not common to your interest, to your workload, right? So you would need to understand that. That will help you. Another one, identify 401 HTTP status codes, which is going to be unauthorized access. Try to get and see how many of those happened, and also using Athena views and get the results out. You can try to detect unusual user agent, right? So you can filter out the common browsers and then try to see what's really happening with the user agent, who is accessing your workloads, right? And also try to analyze URI patterns, right? You know what you're running, right? If you have an admin, you probably have something /admin. If you don't have and you see admin accesses, so you try to understand and trying to find out the way into your workload. So again, logs as a baseline, then have them stored in S3, then run Athena. That will take you very much fast from zero to understanding what is where a potential suspicious activity happen.
One thing I forgot to mention in the beginning of this is that we will have some demos of some of the things that we're talking about. I think including querying logs from Athena, logs that are stored in S3 from Athena. I think we're gonna add in the additional resources some clips of some of the stuff that they're talking about. So look out for that. Now, does okay, fine. You've identified that there's a security breach. What are the steps you need to take?
Yeah, the next steps here are containing or containment. So once you found where the vector of the breach is happening, when we talk about vector, we mean the way that an intruder has gone into your account. Now that vector could either be access keys that they've acquired. It could either be a website that you're trying to attack and do a DDoS attack on. Vectors can be all kinds of endpoints of how they get into the account and what they're trying to do to compromise it. But once you notice that, now it's time to contain that. Why do we want to do containment? Containment has many strategies as far as that goes, is limiting damage. It prevents lateral movement, so from jumping from server to server. It prevents that east-west traffic from happening, prevents additional data loss, and allows analysis of forensics in a safe area. And it also is protecting sensitive data as well. So your first step is to definitely try to isolate and try to get that service or whatever they're attacking out of the mix, in order for those things to not happen to you. The other thing too is that it allows for analysis and for forensics. That's very important. Never ever do you want to ever delete anything within this attack vector. You don't want to delete your EC2. You don't want to delete a user that maybe they created. You want to go ahead and isolate those as well.
Yeah, because you were talking about how, like, isolation specifically, you want to isolate your EC2 instances, you want to maybe isolate your network, whatever the blast radius is, right, of what you think this attack is, make sure you get that isolated. Um, and then as well, like when you're talking about an AWS specific incident or breach, you've got IAM users or IAM roles that might be compromised. And the way to isolate those, again, maybe you don't necessarily want to just delete the user or the role, especially are they used somewhere else? Do you need forensic tracking of the actions being taken? Um, the thing that I would say there is um, there's a way to either temporarily revoke session credentials that are tied to that role. But you can also just the most straightforward way is just to apply like a denial policy to that role or user. Um, and that's something that we've got a recording of a demo of. Pretty straightforward. AWS actually has a policy existing already called AWS denial that you can just attach to any user or role, and that supersedes any of the permissions that that user or role might have. Um, so that's what I would recommend as far as isolation. If the user is coming from like an access key that you might use on the CLI or something, you can also deactivate that, um, and that would stop any permissions that that user would have as well. But if it's a role with policies, the denial addition is the way to go.
I guess as you're going through this, as you're doing your forensic work and looking through those logs and looking at your blast radius, you quite often are going to have to come back and redo this and apply those policies or lock out those instances or whatever it might be, isolate them, because you're going to discover more and more things that people have created. I remember when I was working at AWS, I had a customer that had a security breach, and the people that did it had spun up all the resources in a region that we weren't using. So nobody saw it. They never saw any odd instances in the console until they got their bill, right? But as they started doing the forensics, they realized that the people had actually spun up new roles and even new AWS accounts, and were then doing their stuff in those accounts. So we had to go through and find what they were doing and try and get one step ahead of them every time they were creating a new thing, right?
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, that is part of an attack chain, right? Establishing persistence, establishing some sort of access, and being able to track that is totally important for sure.
Right, and that's why Tyler made that point too, that deny all policy. It's very important that that policy, once it gets applied, it pretty much shuts them out. So they can no longer do any kind of API calls. They can no longer get to anywhere else. At that point, it's kind of an obvious that we caught you. So it's kind of like you got to act fast at that point then too. So and once you get those users under control too, that's very helpful if there are compromised keys. And that denial policy is definitely going to help you out. You can create a group, a denial group, and you can add the user to the group. Again, avoiding deletion on that. So good call out there from Tyler to for that denial policy and to what to do with those users. EC2 instances, yeah, definitely isolate those. And Tyler, how can you do those isolate EC2 instances?
Isolating EC2 instances, I've seen. So usually, what I've seen is you want to isolate them just at the instance level. Like if for some reason you've got an open network, you could try it like restricting NACLs. But commonly you want to just associate a security group with the instance, and only one security group that's just locked down. So it allows no network traffic in, no network traffic out. Um, and that would be the way to isolate it at the network level. You could also, we're talking about IAM roles again, you can remove any associated IAM roles, or make sure that those don't have any permissions. Um, but you can have that as a manual action once you have kind of a playbook or something for addressing these types of breaches. But I've also seen it automated, right? Like whatever tools you're using, could be a Lambda function, could be some other third-party tool, that's, plug in the instance ID. We've got the security group that just allows nothing in, nothing out. Apply that to the instance, and it's isolated.
Now, I imagine there's a whole different suite of tools then on AWS side for containing then, right? You're not just because yeah, everything that we described is more about identifying. So, do you have anything there?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, as we already said, security groups, isolation on the access control list and everything like that would be in this lower level. So on top of the security group, as we know, the security group is usually like places firewall for the instance or the services within your AWS workload. But adding knuckles will help to make it more isolated, right? It plays around fine-grained access control, right? For you can just totally control the user or the group to the specific instance, right? It helps with the security network enhancement, just better protecting the internet-facing web service or machines on your end. Also, the security benefit of that kind of helps you to prevent the DDoS attacks or brute force attacks, things like that, and unauthorized access attempts. So this again, security groups, knuckles, lower level. You can go higher so on the hierarchy, and we can use, for example, the AWS config, right? Provides the details view on AWS resource configuration within your workload. Minimize it automate things. So within the containment strategy, you have helps you to automate, minimize that human intervention, therefore minimizes the fact that some human error could sneak in, right? And then we go higher, we can talk about AWS Security Hub. This is like a management posture service for everything. Again, you can use automate to automate security checks and then implement security standards. So again, removing human factor, just building this up, holding this inside. Important thing I didn't mention about knuckles and security groups, the documentation. As a team, you guys have to document things. you have make it versions. So you need to know where, what, and how you apply those security measures. Naming convention is important. That should be across all your workloads, applicable to the same type of services that you implement or tools that you implement. Then we didn't mention, Sam, you were talking about something that was in your previous career that happened, that someone was running services outside of the usual region. So then we talk about the control tower and the SCPs, right? So those services, so policies at the organizational level could prevent from certain organizational units to operate within certain region. This is like a very simple example. There are much more denial opportunities, but just as a kind of link to your example. Another one, the control tower. So control tower will either deny creating accounts, right, or allow creating account to certain users. So at each step of your AWS workload and infrastructure, you have a service or a tool that can help you with the security posture from very bottom to very high level.
I remember that story, Sam, and the advice was basically whatever regions you don't expect to be having activity in, block the rest automatic or already.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've worked with customers that have gone through the block versus allow scenarios for regions, for services, for even down to like dev accounts are not allowed to deploy anything greater than a 4XL instance size. It gets a bit dangerous getting into that territory, not from a security perspective, but you start blocking the creativity of your development teams, right? So if you suddenly say you're only allowed to use the database that we insist on, and then Amazon comes out with a new database type, you're stopping people from being able to try that out. But I am a big fan of definitely blocking regions that you don't expect or shouldn't be used. Classic example: if you're a company running in here in Europe, why would you have Sydney and Melbourne open in Australia? Now you might be running CloudFront down there, but you might not be running any workloads. You can change that later with SCPs, exactly as Timo mentioned.
Now, I don't want to promise anything we don't have. I was curious, do we have any demos of using, like, how we use security out of AWS config? Actually, now that I say that question out loud, I imagine that AWS themselves has some videos.
Yeah, Tyler did have a video on where he took away, permissions in a deny all group of an EC2 instance and showed how those permissions on an EC2 instance of a role can affect your vector of attack. So if they're attacking an EC2 and there's a role attached to it, if that role is over provisioned, that's definitely going to provide them more of an attack vector to go lateral. So that if you give it over permissions on an EC2 instance with the role, they can get into 3 buckets. They could get into other areas inside of your network. They can get into other EC2 instances if that's the case. So Tyler had a video on that to show how when you take away permissions and put the deny all on, how instantly they're gone. You can't do anything at all. So the next step onto that is to revoke permissions after that. So after you revoke their session or take away their ability to do any API calls, then you want to revoke their session, and then they're gone. They're done. They can't do anything else. So that's the importance of just getting that and finding out where that vector attack is, and then just eliminating it.
Yeah, we can link it in. Tyler, you were going to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add too, going back to config and security hub. Yeah, we don't necessarily have a demo for that here, but they're very cool services. Config, especially in the event of a breach, if you've got that enabled, will link all the CloudTrail logs like Dima was talking about, all the changes, and have a timeline for you. So like that's I have used that during security investigations time and time again. So definitely, if you're not familiar with that, take a look. Look up some screenshots, look up some walkthroughs, and it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and that's where your automation will come into. Config can be set up to do automation. So if it detects something, it can automate that. So let's say, for an example, somebody changes a security group. Well, config could go in and say, hey, you're not changing that security group. That one shouldn't have been changed. I'm changing it back to where it should be. So those types of things can help you out as well in the tools in AWS for like config is going to be one of your best friend, because that's your configuration management tool right there in AWS. So that controls all your configuration. or how it's set up. So you want to do that.
Let's move on. Okay, so we talked about identifying, we talked about isolating, containment, whatever word is used in the industry. But now, what about fixing the damn thing, remediating?
Yeah, I'll start maybe from talking about IAM and access on the access code keys and everything, and that best practice of rotating them and updating them once in 90 days or less. So I would say you can start doing right now if you want to remediate, just update the keys to avoid any headache on that. And the other part is AWS Systems Manager, Patch Manager. Those could kick in automatic updates for you, again, removing the human interaction. So this patch manager here, updating the access keys right away. And then there's another important one that I wanted to share based on my background, as I'm coming from software engineering and development. We all deploy some workloads. We all build them, the software. Sometimes the vulnerabilities and issues in the security posture come from this area, not specifically from infrastructure or anything that you missed in your AWS workload infrastructures wise, but it comes from the software. So you have to have the ability to streamline the change fast from your test environment or dev environment to production. So you have to have those best practices in the DevOps world, having CI/CD in place, having code pipeline already. I'm not talking about right now about services, just having this all set up using the DevOps best practice. You have to control your code. You have to pipe it through the code review. You have to run it through automation tests. Again, we always saying automation, because anywhere things that are automated, again, will remove the factor of human error, plus it will be much faster than you can do it manually. So the vulnerabilities that are popping up through the software development lifecycle of your application are important to address, because this patching is something that you have to do. There's no like straightforward automated tool that will do it for you, right? You will need to revisit your code. I don't know what you've done. Like, I don't know, maybe your access key is leaked. Then you want to update that. You have to update it. You have to push the code through dev stage prod or QA stage prod, at least 2-3 phases, run test. You don't want to push your code to production for sure, because that's not patch management, but you want to do it. So you have to have those tools set up for you, knowing that you have to run it at any moment. So you have to have the ability to release fast. Yeah, that's probably, this is what I wanted to mention about the software part of the patching your infrastructure.
That's great, Dima, for that. Definitely, you'd want to have your software patched for sure. I've seen breaches where they have tacked the software inside of an EC2 instance that wasn't patched. So having patching and making sure that things are patched after that is very important, unless you just get attacked again. The other thing to check is to make sure that your access keys are rotated. Even if an account wasn't compromised, you should still rotate those access keys if you haven't done it in a while. So it's always best to do it. Somebody's have policies at 90 days, some do 45. So it just depends on what your policy stance is for your appetite for taking on that risk. So always make sure that you rotate those keys on a compromise. Even if it wasn't a user, it's always good to do that. The root user account, also the root user password should be changed as well inside of this breach. Even if it wasn't something that was breached, it should be changed anyway. A lot of times people don't change their passwords for the root account, and it could have been years before you changed it. So chances are it's a good time to do it right now. You've just been compromised. You're putting things back together. That's one thing to knock out on your list. That's low hanging fruit that should have probably been done. Make sure that MFA is enabled after that too. If you're re-enabling the account, if they got in through the root account credentials and MFA wasn't enabled, that's a problem too. That's definitely a finding on any security analyst chart. There's that root user always needs to have MFA. So make sure that's enabled too, if it's not already when you're bringing back the accounts. Also, just make sure that anything else, you're documenting these. You got to document the incident. You got to document what happened. You got to document what's going on. You also got to let AWS know some certain things too. Maybe somebody ran up a bill, like Sam was saying earlier. Somebody ran up a bill for $10,000 because they had a Bitmine coining in Europe going on. Who knows? Something like that going on. So that too, you could ask for refunds from AWS. And I'll let Tyler get into that a little bit more as far as the incident reporting goes. That's the next step into this, is reporting your incidents after you get back up. So Tyler, do you want to take that?
Yeah. I want to a couple things that you mentioned too, right? I think are key. Documentation. You got to have documentation and a timeline of events, um, because you're going to be reporting this to, um, maybe your executive team, maybe stakeholders. You could be reporting it to AWS. A lot of times, um, if you have an access key leaked or some sort of credential compromise, AWS might know that this is happening before you know that this is happening. Sometimes they will shut down certain capabilities within an account if they see that malicious activity is trying to happen. Um, so you need to be able to tell AWS, yes, we have seen this, we have addressed this, and here's what we're going to do to prevent this down the road. And then, like you mentioned, Greg, if you have run up a huge bill, that's something that you can always ask AWS. Can we help? Can we get some help here at all? Um, it's not anything that they have a specific policy, but AWS also isn't looking to punish their customers for for mistakes, especially if this is a first time kind of thing. So that's just something to keep in mind. But overall, like having that narrative, being able to say, here's how this started, here's what happened, here's what we did, um, and having the full process documented not only helps you report it to other parties, but it's something that you can keep in a knowledge base and refer to later. And you can build up on that and start to see, oh, what are some patterns? What do we keep missing? What keeps going wrong here? We really need to fix this.
Are those referred to? Are those called postmortems, or is that just when like a product bug occurs that crashes the
I,
app or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen postmortem, post-incident review, is usually what I hear it as. Um, but yeah, it's as long as it's post, as long
And
as you
and
know that everything has happened. Yeah.
is the incident review or response document, is that just as much for AWS as it is for internal? If you're trying to get money back, um, money that you lost as a result of this, do you need to go to them with this? Is that a requirement, or does that just help your case? Or
I would say it helps your case. AWS really just wants to know that what happened and that it won't happen again, and that it's taken care of. Um, Other post-incident activity might be more like establishing what teams are responsible for deploying this patch, um, or what other tooling maybe wasn't enabled that should have been enabled. So um, AWS doesn't necessarily need to know. You don't need a 10-page PDF to share with them, um, um, but that post-incident review is for you very valuable.
didn't they just recently release like a service for this, AWS, that is?
Yeah, so they've got security incident response now. I think was released around the beginning of the month. So this timing is really good.
December.
But
We're recording in
y-
December.
yeah, um, exactly. Thank you. Um, Yeah, and that is it's a managed service, that includes some automation and some tooling, but it is also something that allows access to AWS's customer incident response team. So whenever you have an incident, you can open up a request with them, and someone from their team will be able to assist, and work through some of this with you. And that's all the steps, right? Of helping detect what happened, helping analyze, helping contain, and then helping with that post incident review as well. So they can be there with you alongside. Um, and that is in my mind, I see that as positioned sort of for growing security teams. If you've got an established SecOps team already, it could still be valuable, but it's really meant to be there as sort of a go beside as you're walking through this. I
The
guess. Oh, go ahead.
the stuff that the tasks that they do, are those some is that is there 100% overlap between what they do versus what you've helped customers with, or what anyone here has helped customers with when they have come to you with a security breach incident, need help? Have you done all of this? Or is there something that they do that we don't do, for instance? And, if I want to be generic, any partner.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think we help with a lot of what they do, right? We've got, um the follow the sun 24/7 kind of support available. We can help read logs. I think AWS is going to have more specific access, right, to their an internal tooling um, for that type, if you really need specific details. But we've certainly helped customers, giving them advice on remediating breaches, analyzing logs, even, they'll reach out and say, "Hey, this is weird. Is this something that seems malicious to you, or is there something else going on?" So even that initial analysis is something we've helped with.
Got it. Guess they're clearing that up. Let's now move on to, okay, we've remediated the incident. How can we prevent this from ever happening again? So what are your best practices for preventative measures?
I think we all decide IAM, security groups, knuckles. So things that we are using throughout the process of detecting and remediation are going to be the same things that we will use in order to prevent things to happen, right? So the more time you invest into preventive measures and preventive services, the probably less time you will need to recover from an incident. So, as I said, an identity and access management service is important to focus on and dedicate time. And the things that are important to focus is provided temporary security credentials, all right, implementing strong password policies, and implementing MFA, and avoiding using anything with root user. So don't do anything with root user, and minimize it to the bottom. So another thing is applicable for that is when you need to strive to implement the least privilege principle. That means if you don't have to access this service, just don't provide it. Ideally, you start a new user with 0 permissions. So, and then implement the process internally to request the permission, right? So this is a processual thing. And then you add the permission. Use Access Analyzer to understand and learn about levels of access for different services, for different users, user group, and so on and so forth. So limit, remove, always review those. Always review those. Remove unused, upgrade what you think is updated. So those things are important. The other thing is, we already said, service control policies. You can set up those within your organization and start limiting things like don't access this agent, don't implement such and such. So build boundaries, right? Build boundaries. That kind of they're gonna help you on the higher level, like controlling your organization. Always monitor your logs. So we come back to the logs, how those logs enable. Always monitor, put alerts. Monitoring is very important as part of the prevention. Ideally, if you have resources, you build up a dedicated team for the security purposes, like to cover your security posture. If you don't have the resources, you still need to dedicate at least one team member that knows how to operate the whole cycle from the prevention to remediation. I'll take it this way because we even that the conversation went another way. So another thing that I wanted to highlight is what's called the well-architected framework review. This is the review that you can use us to conduct that, and this is a review that will help you to understand if your workload is well architected. One of the pillars is a security pillar. So conducting this review is very important, even though it's not required. But that will kind of help you to understand at what level of architecture from the security standpoint your workload is covered. They're very simple. It's long but simple. You answer the questions. you discover items which called risk items that could be high risk items or a medium risk items. And then what you need to do, ideally, if you discover some high risk item, you have to remediate it as soon as possible, right? And then again is one of the preemptive measures. So ideally, you do that prior to you release your workload, but you still can do it after. And as I said, this is very so your workload is probably going to be liquid, so it's changing. So once in a while, you have to redo this sort of review just to keep up with the changes. So that's things that I wanted to mention as a preventive mechanism.
It's a really important point you mentioned there, Dima. Is that customer workloads do change? They are liquid, but so do the releases from the cloud providers, right? Every few months they come out with an update to this service or that one. They come out with a totally new service that might suit your workload better, and not just in the security space. Certainly for the focus today, but we do recommend that you should be running those well-architected reviews at least once a year, maybe even more often if you're going through major changes in your workloads, because the targets change, right? And to keep on top of it and to make sure you're running it as securely as well as cost efficiently and high availability and so on as you can, you should do that really regularly. So great shout out there.
Yeah, and just wanted to add that the well-architected questionnaire that is behind the review is also changing according to the progress
Yeah,
of a
absolutely.
cloud provider. Yeah. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, I imagine when with Gen AI and everything and everyone trying to build apps, we did an episode of LLM security, and so I imagine that also opened a whole bunch of new vectors and from maybe new questions needed to be added to that sheet
Yeah, I
for
mean, last
prompt
year they even added the
injection.
sustainability pillar as well, right? So there's
Mm,
there's different types of focus as well as just new questions.
yeah. Anything else as far as preventive measures? I do want to make sure we have enough time for, I guess I'll call it story time because I want to, I want to hear some interesting stories just to put some of these lessons into more practical, uh, framing, I guess, more realistic framing. So we've been talking a lot about what you should and shouldn't do. But before we move on to that, any final words on, I guess, preventative measures, best practices, things you recommend to customers?
I'd real quick just like to make sure, we've talked a little, like when you talk about security and preparation, it can be very easy to go into the technical preparation, right? Encrypting data, make password policies, alerting, and that's all great. But something that the well-architected framework security pillar also touches on, and something that you have to have, is preparing your people, having playbooks defined, having playbooks tested and run through, having that knowledge base that I mentioned earlier, and other training on what tools you're using, sharing knowledge within your team. So just being technically prepared is great. Having your people prepared is really what you need to be able to um, expertly respond to an incident. And AWS actually has something we can link to, I'm sure, is a security incident response technical guide. It's kind of lumped into the documentation of that new security incident response service, but that's something I wanted to point out. It goes through how do you prepare your people, what are the steps, detection, containment, all of that, and walks you through a post incident kind of guidelines. And AWS also has some sample playbooks for common scenarios that we can link to as well. But there are a lot of resources out there that are really valuable for that sort of thing.
Right. And see, being secure is the amount of the blast radius is keeping that down. That's the idea. You want to keep the blast radius down because it's not a matter of like, oh my gosh, I never want to be attacked. Okay, it may happen, it may not happen, but if you do, you want to make sure you can just, you know, decrease the blast radius that if it does occur, you do that. So that's what you prepare for. You prepare for decrease the blast radius. It's about managing that risk. What's your risk of appetite? And again, that comes with cost too. So the more risk you're willing to take, the less cost you're going to put into security. The more cost you're going to put in security, the less risk you're taking because you're putting more tools, you're putting more monitors, you're putting more automation into it, you're putting more of your time into it. So it has to be purposeful. Security has got to be purposeful. If you're just going into it and you're not even looking at security, you're going to be breached all day long. And that's what happens sometimes with these customers that we work with, is that we give them advice, but they don't implement it. And then they call us again. You've gotten breached again. Well, did you put those policies in that we were talking about last time you got breached? No, we didn't do that yet. Oh, okay. Well, that would have stopped this breach this time. So, it's kind of like those kind of things that once you realize something is a gap, you need to fill it. You need to put it in place right away. Don't let it hang out there for very long. If you know you have a vulnerability, take care of it, or at least decrease the risk of it being an attack vector on that. So if you can't remediate something right away, at least try to minimize the risk of it. And that could be putting a security group in, or that could be putting something else in, like limiting permissions or doing things like that. Um, Maybe even not releasing the service yet until it is secure. Some services come out and they're not secured yet. Also looking to see if it's secured in the way, like if you're using FedRAMP or anything like that. Is this a FedRAMP thing that we could use? Is this a service that we could even use in this type of environment? So knowing what security posture you're even trying to go for is very important. What are we trying to achieve here? What, are we trying to do SOC 2? Are we trying to do ISO 27001? What's our framework look like? So getting a framework is important too. So I think documentation, framework, planning, getting your people organized, like Tyler was saying, going over scenarios, going over rehearsals, doing dress rehearsals, those are very important. Most people don't do that. Do you ever rehearse for a scenario where you're going to be breached? Probably not. A lot of people don't do that. So it's same with disaster recovery. It's same with security. You need to have a scenario. And Tyler was mentioning this, training your people. What scenarios should we go through? Somebody breaches an S3 bucket. What do we do? Do we all just twiddle our thumbs? Who does what? So that's where it's important to get that documentation down. Who does what? Get that racing matrix. Who's going to go over here? Who's going to write it up? Who's going to do the incident response? Who's going to contact AWS if we need to? And it could be just a one-man show. That's fine. But having that documentation and that policy down and getting that implemented is part of the security framework too, and the security posture that you want to have is having those policies in place, because those direct you of what you want to do. So password policies. How long is your passwords? Well, we have 10 workers that are in IT, and none of them know how long the password should be. So nobody can give an answer. So that's where these policies help guide your IT staff into putting into decisions of your security team of what they want to focus on and implement. And so everybody's on the same page at that point. So that's why Tyler's, it's very important to have that documentation. It's very important to have those policies and procedures in place. Otherwise, you're flying blind and you don't know exactly what to do. Nobody's on the same page. So that's why it's very important for the even in the before you even have a security breach, to have all this in place, or to even start thinking about this. Again, security is purposeful. It's got to be something that you're taking on as a group. It shouldn't be just one man show trying to do it or think about it. It has to be the whole organization who's on security alert. That's why you train your employees. That's why you do all that kind of stuff too. So anything else, Dima, you wanted to add, or a story that you need to tell, or Tyler?
Yeah, with that said, let's maybe jump into story time, or as Sam called it, horror stories.
Look, we've all been there, right? Everyone's had them. So I mean, I've spoken in the past about the ones that I've experienced, but I'd love to hear about some of the more sophisticated stuff you guys have seen.
I'll jump in. This is actually before my time at DoiT, but I was um, still consulting with a security team, and we actually had like, I'm connecting things that we've talked about already, right? This was an instance that we noticed some unusual logs were coming from, like network outbound activity to weird URLs. Um, so the team started looking into that. Um, as the team was on the instance, like trying to pull some logs, trying to see like what's the configuration that's maybe affected here. We noticed that some other changes were being made, like the attacker is on the box. The calls are coming from inside the house, whatever. We quickly took those steps. All right, we have a process to isolate the instance. We thankfully practiced that. Um, the next steps were, what team owns this instance? Um, who is the development team for the software that's on this instance? This was a 0-day, as far as we know. It was not like a released vulnerability. Um, so just trying to communicate with the vendor, communicate with the devs who also had stuff on the instance, and go through all of that was was a lot of work. But thankfully, those automations that we had helped speed things up. And the post-incident review, I remember we talked a lot about like what went right, what went wrong, but also where we got lucky, things that we didn't really take into account. Um, that instance happened to have an overly broad role attached that could have read secrets, could have gotten into S3, but the attacker wasn't looking for that. They were just looking to download specific malware packages on the instance. So we got lucky there. If a targeted attacker had been trying to get into more things in AWS, they would have had a good time. We would have had a bad time. So, but it all worked out in the end, thankfully.
It's great when the story that I've told before, just one little piece was that the attacker actually deployed a shell script to do some, I think it was Bitcoin mining, similar to what Greg mentioned earlier. But they had a really nicely commented bash script that they used to do it, so we were able to see each step they were going through. It was
I
quite
love
funny.
it. They documented their bash script for
And the first thing it did was it went through and removed other rootkits that had already compromised your instance to try their own one.
That's one disciplined hacker. I'll tell you what, that is great. I love that. That's one for the books. I like that.
Hire them on for some other development.
I'm
Yeah,
sure the
geez,
customer loved that too.
that's it right there. I'm gonna go ahead and document this whole thing, this attack here for you guys.
Exactly. But it made the postmortem really easy, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. That's a lovely one. I like that one. That's the best one I've heard. I like that. The only things the best things I've done is maybe have like a WAF, so Windows or a web application firewall, and putting rules onto that to help mitigate attacks. Those usually are good to do. One of my favorite rules to add is and I know people always cringe at this sometimes or say stuff like, "Yeah, that's not going to help," but it does help. Putting in your country of where you want your website to be available in, so you can block certain countries from hitting your website in a web application firewall. So that's one of my favorite rules is to do that. The attack vector goes down significantly if certain countries can't hit your website. So it's very important to. I say that's one of my favorite rules. If you have a website, a load balancer in front, put a WAF in there, throw down some basic AWS WAF rules, and you're going into a better position than if you didn't have it at all. So we did that one time versus the customer. We put in some country origin, and suddenly the traffic went down by half. So I mean, it's like it definitely can help out in mitigating DDoS attacks and traffic attacks like that if you can limit the traffic of where it's coming from and you can isolate that. Again, the part about isolation. So there's different methods of isolation in each one of these services, and that's one of the key elements of learning what that isolation is. And this one in a WAF is to put in those types of rules. You can put in the country of origin of where you want it to come from and block all the others. You can put in a count. You can put in you can only hit this website 1,000 times from this IP address before you get blocked. So you can put in rules like that along with the WAF. So that helps mitigate a lot of those attack vectors too inside of your web. So I definitely recommend if you're going to put up a web interface to put up a load balancer in front of it, even if it's just a single little website, put a load balancer in front, application load balancer, and put a WAF in front of it to protect it. You can also do that in CloudFront, put a WAF in front of it. WAFs are very, 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 very important and very powerful, and they can block a lot of traffic before they even hit your instance and drop it. So that's exactly what you want to do is you always want to protect your resources, the closest you can there to mitigate it. So the entry point is going to be, AWS's entry point. You want to just drop the packets there. You don't even want to hit in your server or getting to it. So the more you can do that, the better off you're going to be is to get that mitigated or to get those attacks further away from your instance that you have. I swear, I thought every time you said "waff" that your dog thought you said "wolf," and so your dog was just answering to you. Like
That's
your
what he
dog
was
and
doing,
Parker.
wasn't he? Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
woof, woof. There you go, woof. That's crazy, dog. I swear that dog's going nuts.
Do we have
Right.
any more stories before we sign off?
I have one. It's not a horror story, and it's a little bit of an abstract thing. So, as a certified well-architected proficient, I conduct well-architected framework review to our customers. And I wanted to share that I worked with a number of customers that were completely sure the security posture is covered, it's well architected, so on and so forth, and we realized risk items of high level right after the review. And those could be anything. Those could be somewhere you missed some encryption. It could be access keys. It could be related to your software development lifecycle and how you train your team. So what I wanted to share is the importance of the well-architected framework review, and to say that please do not underestimate those. This is a great preventive mechanisms that will cover and help you to understand what exactly do you have. You might think you have something, but you could miss a pulp and then get your environment hacked. So that's the story. Like, I got customers that thought they're well architected, covered everything, and we worked together on remediation steps after all. So yeah, that's a cute story, not the horror one.
Yeah, it's it reminds me of that quote. It's like everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. But
That's a great line. I love that. Yeah,
So-
that's great. What Dima was talking about is establishing a baseline. So that's one of the most important things to know is where do I sit today? Where's my baseline at? I have no idea. And if you think you do, and you haven't done anything to even prove that out, you don't really know. Until you go through the steps, until you look at some of the audits, until you go through some of the steps, you don't know. You don't know where your gaps are at sometimes. And maybe you do, but you don't. I mean, that's why security, I say, it's a purposeful thing. You have to take actions to do it. You have to go through and get your baseline done. You have to go through the well-architected framework. Yeah, it's a bunch of questions you ask, but you know what? It's going to tell you where you're sitting more so than what you think you are. And like Dima was saying, it's very important to go through those exercises. So, and then establish those baselines. Because if you don't know where you're starting, you don't know where you need to go. So that's important too, as far as that goes.
very, very philosophical.
Yes.
So
Yes.
to sum things up, we've discussed how to identify a breach, how to contain it, or the damage at least, how to recover securely, and how to prevent future issues. So, we'll be sharing some resources in the episode description, but also be sure to check out the AWS resources around security. If you work with DoiT already, feel free to request a security pillar review from the well-architected framework or security posture review. We do those. And thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.